Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Ripley with Agile for Humans and professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I'm stepping in as a guest host for episodes highlighting the experiences of other Scrum.org professional Scrum trainers. I hope you enjoy getting to know these amazing people. All right, welcome. New episode of Becoming a Scrum Master. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. Joining me today, fellow PST, and now he's labeled himself Scrum Master, which is awesome, Richard Ross. Richard, how are you doing, sir?
Hello, I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, and I appreciate you being here. I know you just wrapped up a course teaching a PSM, but so I'm catching you when you're most vulnerable. After a course, your brain's kind of fried, so we'll get some good answers.
Indeed.
First question. So can you share the story of how you first encountered Scrum and what motivated you to become a Scrum Master? So was there a particular moment or experience that sparked this? But what's like the beginning of the journey? What sparked this adventure?
So actually, first I encountered Scrum as so I was a project manager, and one of the developers came up to me and said, "Hey, we should do this thing in a way like we check up the progress every 2 weeks, and you do it like this, and we check up where we are, and then we decide what we do next." And I was like, "Sure, sounds reasonable. Why not?" So that was the first experience, but I wasn't Scrum Master back then. It was only, I think it was like 2 years after, about a decade ago or 11 years ago, I joined a company. I joined as a project manager again. And actually, 2 weeks after I joined, the guy, one of the owners, they came up to me. It was a small agency. They said, "Richard, we have this biggest deal of our lives, biggest contract that this organization ever had. We're gonna have this. We're gonna build a website for this massive corporate over there in Germany, and they want to do it in Scrum. We don't know anything about it, but I read here there's some Scrum Masters, so you're going to be a Scrum Master, so read something about that. How about that?"
Nice.
And I was like, okay, I just joined this company. I thought it was a promising future as a project manager. And so 2 weeks in, they threw me in this role, and that's how I started.
So you were voluntold.
Yeah, exactly.
Very nice. That seems to be a common theme emerging on these shows, that people were just thrown into it. So you had to work as a Scrum Master, whether by choice or by being voluntold. And so was there a specific project or situation where you had that eureka or light bulb moment where you saw the true power and potential of Scrum? And if so, could you describe that?
Those moments start to kick in only retrospectively after some time.
Sure.
I start to realize how many silly moments I was actually facing. And especially, so usually when I start, also when I do trainings, I typically say, so I used to be programmer, then I used to be project manager. Actually, as a project manager, most of my funny stories come from that era, but I realized them retrospectively, how silly I was. And so I think it was only after, so at first I was completely lost. I didn't know what I'm doing. Obviously, I tried to read whatever I could, and I didn't know properly how to create an environment, how to spark self-managed team, and how to support all that. So it took me some time, but it was maybe a year or two after all of this was happening. I was still drowning in all the books and stuff, where I started to realize and I started to saw benefits that before just were not there. So yeah, I guess the product owners that I used to happen, I was lucky enough to be working on a product where product owner was actually from a customer agency, and the product owner was a customer, actually, was corporate from the customer side. So when they were happy what we are doing and how they are steering the direction, so that kind of started to say, okay, so maybe this approach makes sense and makes people maybe getting the righter product instead of assumptions. That makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, that ability to validate that you're right is probably pretty interesting. That is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Cool. So how has your perception and execution of the Scrum Master role evolved? Are there aspects of the role or accountabilities that you view differently now compared to when you first started?
Oh, absolutely. What a great question. I think I was about to say, older I get, the more experience I get. Let's put it that way. I
Sure.
think I'm being less appreciated at first by teams because I do less things. So I used to, as a junior Scrum Master, I easily fall into the trap of, I call it a Scrum mom. So I was running around and I tried to help everyone. And I tried to make myself useful by removing all sorts of impediments, even those that were not real impediments, and people were and the teams were perfectly capable of dealing with those impediments themselves. But hey, I tried to help out. So I felt good about myself and I did a lot. But more I start to learn and more I was exposed to this role and more I was involved in community, either fellow friends that also became PSTs eventually or whatnot, I start to realize that actually I'm harming this ability of team to self-manage. They are becoming dependent on me. So I start to carefully choose what I do, where I interact and how. And so this was how my role evolved. And might sound funny at first, but I do significantly less now than I used to do then. But when I do something, it tends to have bigger impact on the other hand. So it takes time for people to appreciate it though. So
So
yeah.
what would you say are one of those things that you do now that has greater impact that perhaps you weren't doing earlier in your career?
So I put strong emphasis on the structure of the organization. So I do spend a lot of time discussion and talking with people how we should organize ourselves and how actually customer sees our product. What is the product from the customer perspective, and that these components that we have here are not real products. And then people they work in those structures and they are used to a certain way of doing things. And then I go in there and then I say, if we want this thing called business agility, if we want this adaptiveness here, then we should really strive for one product owner and one product backlog and multiple teams that can serve this product owner and can build great things together. And so that is usually being met with a lot of negativism or skepticism at first. And so I spend a lot of time explaining that. So those are things that go very slowly. It takes a lot of time, and is being appreciated only again retrospectively after some time. That product owner goes all of a sudden, wow, this is so refreshing. I can just throw stuff at whoever, and some teams picks it up and then gets it done. And I don't have to deal with coordination and dependency so much anymore. And so, for instance, that.
It's an interesting thought that you've brought up a few times indirectly, is that perhaps the impact of a scrum master is typically a lagging kind of measurement, right? It's a lagging, more retrospective kind of discussion rather than in the moment, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
something to think
absolutely.
about. Maybe that's the viewpoint. Maybe it's the long game. We're trying to
Yeah.
make sure that we're not looking for just the short immediate, that we're looking bigger picture. And I think that's a
Yeah.
neat way to look at it.
And I think that's also very stressful for Scrum Masters because
Yeah.
you don't see immediate results and you try
Neither
to
does
make
your
yourself
boss.
useful. Yeah. So then like you walk around the hallways in the office and so how do I make myself useful today? And sometimes that doesn't happen for several days or even weeks. So
Sure.
yeah.
So, what advice would you give to someone aspiring to be a scrum master? Is there a particular mindset, skill, or habit that you believe is crucial for success in this role?
That's a great question. I think you have to understand that you have to have some sort of professionalism in yourself, meaning that you have to believe that you can make things better, like implicitly. Like I do believe that this is not 9 to 5 job. It's not like just to do something here. I facilitate this retrospective, whatever is outcome, or and I go home and I'm fine. No, you really have to have this constant inclination, constant belief that things suck, if I can say that on this show.
Sure.
And this constant desire of improving things. So that's what I would call professionalism, living things in a better shape. So that's important, and that brings the whole back of it. You have to be ready that this is endless queue of books and the knowledge that you have to. It doesn't finish with chapter one or year one. I do this for 10 years now, for a little over 10 years. I feel the bookshelf is just growing. So it's a career choice that you do, and you have to stick with it, and you have to stay persistent. Yeah, persistence and professionalism. Be serious about it.
That's great. The professionalism, persistence, all super important things. You did mention books. And my last question for you, what is the one book that every Scrum Master should read?
Oh,
If you could only have one, which would it be?
does Scrum Guy count? Because some people, yeah.
Okay, so let's say Scrum Guide everybody should read, but what's the book that you think every Scrum Master should also look at? Scrum Guide's a great answer. I'll give it to you.
So I have several candidates. I don't know. I guess I'll skip over some popular ones and I'll go one of my favorites that I would recommend people working with the teams and Scrum Master working with teams. I would recommend Leading Teams by Dr. Richard Heckman. It's a brilliant book. Arguably one of the biggest names, Dr. Richard Heckman, on research of teams. So what kind of interactions and what kind of impact works and what kind of doesn't, I think that's very valuable for Scrum Masters in the long run. Although it is a bit advanced book, I have to say. So it depends. If this question would be from the Scrum Master that is just learning about it, or maybe is doing it for a year. Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah.
It's a great recommendation. Richard, I appreciate you doing this. Is there anything you'd like to promote or get in front of the audience before we wrap this up?
I didn't prepare for this one. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Just thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me here. If anybody wants to learn about what professional Scrum really means, I definitely recommend to check out Scrum.org. Any of the PSTs, they are the messengers of how proper Scrum should look like. So if you want to learn more about that, check out the materials that are on the website or the courses and be fine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.